Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Malloy, and today we're going to look at the essential question of what is a plot of a story? So you've already talked about characters and setting and what those are the parts of a fiction story, but now we're going to focus on the word plot. So if we look at the definition of plot and what that means, it's a sequence of events that tell what happened in the story. So it's things that happen in the story, but they have to happen in a certain order in order for us to understand. And the best way I can explain that to you is by showing you an example of when we get ready for bed. So I have three pictures here. I have a boy sleeping in bed. I have a boy brushing his teeth, and I have a boy listening to a story. So when we get ready for bed, we're not going to have the boy sleeping be the first thing that happens, because that's not the first thing that we do when we get ready for bed. We just don't sleep. So think about what's the first thing. I'll show all the pictures. What's the first thing you do when you get ready for bed? Put that one there so it's a little bit easier to see. First thing you do when you get ready for bed. Now, some of you might do things a little bit differently, but when I help my daughter get ready for bed, the first thing we do is we brush her teeth. So that would be the beginning of my story, brushing my teeth. Then I have these two pictures left. I have reading a book and actually getting in bed. So after we brush our teeth, we read a story. That would be something that happens in the middle if I was telling you a story. The last thing would be getting ready for bed or falling asleep. Okay, so when we look at the plot or we look at the sequence of events in a story, we look at what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end. Or in this case, we use the pictures: brushing our teeth, reading a book, sleeping. Okay, so they have to happen in order so that readers, like you and I, understand what's happening in the story. So we're going to take a look at Lazy, Lonely, Rolly. And we're going to just listen to the story as Mrs. Malloy reads it. And we're going to go through and we're going to pick out something that happened from the beginning, something that happened from the middle, and something that happened from the end. And that will be the plot of our story. The events that happened in our story happened from the beginning, middle, and end. So our title is Lazy, Lonely, Rolly. It's by Jean Willis, illustrated by Joe Body. Lazy, Lonely, Rolly. Rolly was a rhino. He lived in a zoo. He was the only rhino. He had nothing to do. If you've already heard this story, just think about things that you know happen in the beginning of the story, happen in the middle, and happen in the end. And we'll see if what you think about or you come up with is the same as what Mrs. Malloy writes down. Get into the crate, the rhino keeper said. But the lazy, lonely rhino just stayed in his bed. The rhino keeper went to fetch a giant rope. Then he tried to pull Rolly up the short slope. So this is what they're considering the short slope, trying to get the rhino up. The bird keeper came and the bear keeper too. They said, pull and we'll push. That's what we will do. The distance was short, the speed was slow, but into the crate Rolly would not go. keeper came, he told Rolly the plan. Then into the crate that lazy rhino ran. They finally got him in. The rhino keeper took Rolly to an even bigger zoo. There were games to play and lots of things to do. He was not the only rhino. He was now one of 4. So Rolly was not lazy or lonely anymore. So we could have stopped and talked about the different parts of the story in the sense of how Rolly was feeling, why you think that he didn't want to go into the crate, why was he lazy, why was he lonely, but that's not really our focus right now. Our focus is trying to figure out what happens in the beginning of the story, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end, because that's how we can tell the plot of our story. When we are looking at a story, we want to be able to tell a partner or a friend or a family member something that happens from the beginning, the middle, and the end. That's our plot. So if we think about the beginning of our story with lazy, lonely Rolly, almost call him a different name. What's something that happens in the beginning? What's something that happens in the beginning? If you had to tell me something that happens in the beginning of the story, what could you say? One thing I think of is that Rolly the rhino was lazy in the zoo. So I'm going to write lazy or Rolly. Keep calling him lazy instead of his name. Rolly. My mistake. Was lazy and lonely in the zoo. Rolly was lazy and lonely in the zoo. Now, the middle section is usually a little bit bigger, okay? So as long as we told something that happened from the beginning, the middle, it could be a couple different things. What you might say is something that happens in the middle is different than someone who sits next to you, and that's okay. As long as it actually happened in the middle of the story, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing. So in the middle, I'm going to say that the bird keeper and bear keeper tried to help move Rolly. That's what I'm going to say happened in the middle. The bird keeper and bear keeper tried to help move Rolly. Maybe you or someone else was thinking about this. The rhino keeper was trying to get Rolly into the crate. Those are both things that happened in the middle. Neither one of them are wrong. It's just something that I chose was different than yours, but they both happened in the middle. So I'm going to say that the bird keeper and bear keeper tried to get Rolly in the crate. We'll use the orange. I'm going to see if I can shorten it. The bird and bear keeper tried to get Rolly into the crate. Now, if we were doing this together at school, you know that Mrs. Malloy would be having you write and help me sound out the sounds. But for the sake of time, I'm just writing it all for you. And then we want to try to find something from the end. So what happened at the end of the story? We know that Rolly was lazy and lonely in the zoo. That was in the beginning. That's what they told us happened in the beginning. Then the bird and bear keeper tried to get Rolly into the crate. What happened at the end? If you said something along the lines that Rolly was taken to a new zoo, you would be correct. Because, if you remember, he wasn't lazy and lonely anymore. He wasn't the only person because he was taken to a new zoo where there were more rhinos. So I'm going to use green because yellow is kind of hard to see. So we're going to say that Rolly was taken notice how I'm still trying to stay in the lines to a new zoo. Okay, so if I said to you, what is the plot of the story that we just read, Lazy Lonely Rolly, you could tell me 3 things that happened in that story in order. You could tell me Rolly was lazy and lonely in the zoo. The bird and bear keeper tried to get Rolly into the crate, and then Rolly was taken to a new zoo. So remember, plot is something that happens, tells what happens in our story. It goes in order, and it always has something from the beginning, something from the middle, and something from the end. So when your teacher asks you about plot, you should always be able to name 3 things from the story that happened. Okay? So I want you to be thinking about when you listen to another story, what's happening in the beginning, what's happening in the middle, and what's happening in the end. Have a great day.